Okay, folks. We're just about to start the recording, which is going to go on YouTube later on this afternoon. So I think if everybody's here, I think we're expecting Kelly Gardner from Advance's Audit Committee, but Kelly's going to come in as an observer, so she'll probably just appear later on in the meeting. So she isn't going to contribute, I think, unless requested to. So if everything's okay, I think we'll start the recording and start the meeting. Okay. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final Audit Committee for 2022. We start with apologies for absence, Heather. If we've got
yes, Chair, Councillor Dale.
Just Councillor Dale. So we are quorate, so there's no problem there. We have got a couple of people who have to leave early, so we're going to rejig the agenda slightly. So I'm proposing to, instead of taking item 6, the report of Head of Internal Audits, Risk Management's Audit Committee Arrangements paper, I'm going to take that one as Mazar's External Audit Report. That allows Cameron to get away a little bit sooner, and Kevin will take your report after that, if that's okay. Second item on the agenda is minutes. The minutes of the meeting of the Audit Committee held on the 28th of September. These have already been circulated, and everybody's had an opportunity to have an input into them, I think. This is just to confirm that these are a true record, and I can sign these off as a true record. Can we confirm that? In a show of hands, everybody's happy with that? Good, excellent, thank you. Item number 3, the disclosure of members' interests. Unless already entered in the Council's register of members' interests, members are required, where a matter arises at a meeting which directly relates to disclosable pecuniary interest, directly relates to financial interests as well, or well-being of another registrable interest as set out in Appendix B, etc. I'll not read the whole thing. It's the standard disclosure of members' interests. Has anybody got anything to declare for this particular meeting? Nothing. Okay, thank you. Right, straight into item number 4 then, which is the monitoring report and action log, which is the report that we bring to every meeting, where we try to capture ongoing actions and things which have been requested, which are in train, and see where we are with them. So if we go to the table, which is in landscape format, item number 1, which is the external audit report. Councillor Oliver queried whether the evaluation reserve error in the Northumberland County Council group account would impact on the corporation tax. The Interim Director of Finance and Section 151 officer to respond. A verbal response has been provided, but a formal written response will be produced. I think that was where we left it last time. I don't think we've had anything further to that for this meeting.
Chair, if I may, I responded this morning to Councillor Oliver confirming in writing the verbal response that I'd given, which is there is no impact on corporation tax liabilities.
Okay, thank you, Jan.
My understanding was that I was asked to respond directly to Councillor Oliver, not to the committee as a whole. I'm very happy to forward the email to all other members of this committee if that's what members wish.
I think the question was raised by Councillor Oliver, but I think the committee sort of expected to see the response as a whole. I think.
Well, it's a one-line response, Chair, just confirming the verbal response. But I'm happy to share.
I'm sure it's a good line, though, Jan. It's one line, but it will be a good one. Okay, well, if you wouldn't mind just passing on, just for protocol's sake, because obviously we raised it as a committee, and if we don't tail it off as a committee, then we've sort of like, we'll have to go to Councillor Oliver and ask if we can see his laptop to see what the answer is. So if you can send it to everybody, that would be great, and then we can box that one off. So I'll tell you what, we'll cross that off the list now and say that we'll assume that one's done. So thank you for doing that. Okay. Right. Okay, next one on the list. The Treasury Management Annual Year Report for the financial year 21-22. Councillor Dale questioned regarding borrowing to be clarified with Section 151 officer after the meeting. This was one specifically I think you were going to take up with Councillor Dale, I think, Jan. Can you update us on that?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Dale has raised some other issues with me as well, so I'm seeking a meeting with her. It's unfortunate she's not here today, but I'm seeking a meeting with her to follow up a number of queries, of which that is one. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to have that conversation yet. But I will make sure that we do that at the earliest opportunity.
Okay, well, I don't know what the other issues are, because obviously if they're
Non-audit
if
issues,
they're
Chair,
not audit committee
not issues
business,
raised in this forum, but in
well,
other forums.
if that's the case, then if we could have it just as we have with Councillor Oliver's question, just a brief update to the committee on the one that was raised in committee.
Indeed, I will do that once
that would
I've
be
had
fine.
the conversation with Councillor Dale.
That would be great, thank you. So we'll leave that one open until next time. Okay, number 3, Treasury Management Annual Report, financial year 21-22. Now, that one says report on audit committee arrangements to be scheduled for the November meeting, and indeed we have got a report in there for this meeting. So that one will be done today, so we can close that one off. The next one down the line is the CALA report. It says regular updates on progress to be made to address issues raising from the CALA report, including the monitoring the action plan for the item we placed on the work programme. So we have got that item on the work programme, but that is obviously putting it on the work programme is one thing, actually getting reports on it is another thing. So is there anything coming down the line anytime soon? Because obviously the CALA report was a good, 6 months ago now, 7 months maybe? Jan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I'm just trying to unmute myself. So my understanding was it was agreed that I would bring periodic reports to this committee, and there are matters which are on your agenda today which touch on aspects of the CALA review and the Section 114 action plan. I hadn't planned to bring a comprehensive update on CALA to this meeting today, but perhaps for the next meeting of this committee that would be an appropriate juncture to bring a report here.
I think that would be excellent, Jan, if you could do that, because you rightly say that there are little strands of things which touch on colour, but the problem is it's like a jigsaw that hasn't been assembled. We can't see the picture until we get the bits together. So it could be an idea to bring something forward at the next meeting. I think, Councillor Oliver, you had a suggestion.
Thank you, Chair. I think when we discussed this, and it wasn't me that raised it, but when we discussed it, it was in particular there was a discussion around the work that the Challenge Board is doing. So I just wonder whether we should just amend this item on the action log to just specifically refer to the Challenge Board work, so that we do get updates on that, because there are different streams of work going on. Obviously, you know, the work that Jan just alluded to, and but there will be other stuff as well.
Mm. I don't have a problem with that. I think if that makes it more specific, and it probably helps you, Jan, to actually get your report together. Has anybody got any particular thoughts on that? Should we agree that as a way forward? Yes, Rick, Chief Executive.
Yes, Chair. The intention is also that there will be a full report taken regularly to full council, which will be a report of the member oversight group, which is overseeing the work of the various officer work packages which are going on. So we have the work packages being delivered by officers. That's been overseen by the member oversight group. Then we have the challenge board providing the critical friend aspects, and the whole lot will be wrapped up, and then a report will be taken to council, so we could bring the similar report here for more detailed discussion, if that's what you look.
Okay, that seems to make sense to me. Yeah, that's fine. So that probably.
Then there's one version of the truth. Then.
I'm all for it. We don't want several versions of the same thing. That makes a lot of sense. If members are happy with that, we'll go down that route. So thank you, Jan. We'll pursue it that way. Did I see a hand up there? No. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, we'll slightly amend the wording on that one, and we'll take that one forward. So we'll keep it open for the time being. Okay, that's good. Moving on. The Strategic Transformation Programme business case, to receive a report from the business case to ensure best value for money for the item we placed on the work programme. That is on the work programme now, so we've got that on there. To say, I'm conscious that putting things on the work programme is one thing, getting them is another, so let's just keep alive to that.
Chair, may I raise
Jan.
the issue in relation to this matter? I think we are in danger of the business case being reviewed multiple times in different places. Corporate Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee will be reviewing the business case, both in its own right and also as one of the supporting building blocks of the MTFP and 23/4 budget. Can I suggest that a discussion takes place with the chair of that committee to ensure that we're not duplicating? I understand that the audit committee, may have a particular interest from a governance perspective, but value for money, my understanding, is part of the remit of corporate services and economic growth. And I just think it would be helpful just to be clear about, where the boundaries are between the two committees. Otherwise, it could end up tying up a lot of officer and member time doing the same job more than once.
Mm-hmm. It is a very good point, Jan. We certainly don't want to end up duplicating work for anybody, and if this best sits somewhere else, we need a conversation about what's been done rather than actually more work be done on top of that. So maybe we'll capture that on this one in terms of not just saying it's on the work plan, but that it will be a conversation between this committee, or the chair of this committee and deputy chair maybe, and the chair of the other committee, if you like, to see where we're going with this, to give us an idea if we can report back. That would probably work, I think, as far as this is concerned.
Thank you.
Okay, if everybody's happy with that, I'm sort of seeing general agreement. Adult social care, this is the next one. Adult social care and wider NHS changes. Monitor any impacts, and for the item to be placed on the work programme, which it has. So we've got that on our work programme. I think that one probably does definitely sit with us, although it obviously has a broader remit as well, like the other ones we just discussed. But I'm happy that that one's sitting on the work programme now. We've got a plan to get some input from that one. The one further down from that was the report on the processes and practices of employment and redundancy payments. This one, we had a definite hard deadline on it, a report to be presented at the November meeting. This one, the ownership of it was yours, Jan, and I think the key questions we were asking about this one, also just one line on this, but I think the discussion we had was specifically about the processes and procedures which may have led up to unlawful payments, and I choose the words carefully because we obviously, we're talking about unlawful payments, not necessarily anything illegal, but unlawful payments and a breach of processes and procedures. So it is quite an important and far-reaching piece of work, this, because it might actually also inform Mazar's value for money review once it comes out. We had hoped to have something for the November meeting, this meeting. Can you update us, Jan, as what's happening with this and where we are?
I can, Chair. Although it has my name next to it in the work programme, it's actually the Chief Internal Auditor that has been leading on this work, and Kevin has been drafting an overarching report. So I have had internal audit reports on the individual payments, and what Kevin has been working on is an overarching report that pulls together the common themes around process and system and control weaknesses that have been identified and the actions that are needed to address them. Separate to that, I am considering the internal audit reports and taking advice on whether these do indeed amount to unlawful expenditure, and if so, whether there is a need for me to exercise my statutory powers to report the matter to full council. So that work is still ongoing, and I'm not yet in a position to come to a definitive view on that yet. But my understanding is that the audit field work has been done. I'm sure Kevin can elaborate on this, and it's simply a matter now of pulling that final report together. These are quite complex matters, Chair, and I understand that the internal audit team have had some difficulty in actually following the audit trail and obtaining the necessary documentation to enable them to complete their field work, and that's the reason for the delay. But I don't know if Kevin has anything to add to that.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. Could you recently?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jan. Yes, it has, as Jan sort of mentioned, been not a straightforward and easy piece of work. So accessing all of the relevant information where we could has taken some time. Jan is right. We've been providing Jan with detailed reports as we've been concluding that work, and we've now sent all of those reports through to Jan. I obviously prepared a draft report for consideration by the committee today, in line with that request. But then obviously it hasn't made the agenda for today, so it would be to the next possible meeting of Audit Committee, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we had hoped to have it today, but I think what we hope more than that actually is to have a really good and detailed and useful piece of work here. I think rather than actually to rush to a deadline to get it through quickly, I think this is, we appreciate the complexity of this work. It can't be done very quickly. So, but you are pretty much finished your field work now, Kevin, on this one, haven't you?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the fieldwork is complete, and there is a report to Audit Committee from me drafted, so that is complete.
Because I'm still struggling with the actual ownership of who owns this report that's coming to committee, because my understanding is that, Kevin, you're inputting to this report, if you like, but it is the Section 151 officer's verdict that we are looking for in the report. It's almost like the conclusion of the report must be the Section 151 officers, because you aren't in a position to actually give the verdict that we're really looking for in here is have any unlawful payments been made, and if they have, the evidence that you've provided from your team, from internal audit, will back up whether unlawful payments have been made. But we do need to have the Section 151 officers' view on that. Jan, is that your understanding?
So, Chair, my statutory responsibility is to report to full council if I am minded to exercise my statutory powers. And so if I were to determine that there had been unlawful expenditure which required me to make a Section 114 report, that report would not be to this committee but to full council, because that's what the legislation requires me to do. My understanding was that what did fall within the remit of this committee was an overview of the council's systems of internal control, and that is the subject of the report that Kevin has drafted. And I do think it's appropriate for the Chief Internal Auditor to report to this committee on the control weaknesses that have been identified in the course of conducting that field work. But they are two separate issues, Chair, and one is a matter for the Chief Internal Auditor as part of his core responsibilities, and the other is a matter for me in my capacity as the Council's Section 151 officer. Clearly they are related, but you know, my duty is to report to the whole Council on the exercise of my powers, not directly to this committee.
Okay, so pardon me for being slow on this one, Jan. So I'm still trying to find out who is the owner of this particular piece of work. Because if it was internal audit, it could have come to this committee. Is that correct? Because internal audit don't have to.
Indeed, it can. And the report that Kevin has drafted, the intention is that it will come to this committee. But I am still considering whether there are grounds for me to exercise my statutory powers. I'm taking legal advice. Once I've determined whether there has been unlawful expenditure, I then will need to consider whether it is of such a magnitude that it requires me to exercise my statutory powers. And if at that point I conclude that that there are grounds for me doing so, I will make a report to full council. But that does not preclude Kevin bringing a report here, informing the committee of the audit findings and of the weaknesses in our systems, processes and procedures that need to be addressed, and an action plan for addressing them. And my understanding is that is the substance of Kevin's report, which he had hoped to bring here today, but is now intending to bring to the next meeting of this committee.
So, right, okay, I'm sorry to belabour this one, because I'm just trying to get my head around where we're at with this. Will your report materially change, Kevin, between what you have drafted now and the next audit committee, which is late January? Is there going to be any added value in this hiatus? We're waiting for the report because we expected it this audit committee. We're going to get it at the end of January now. If it's not going to actually materially change, have we just missed the opportunity to say to this audit committee?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't anticipate the contents of my report changing between now and when it's considered by committee.
So the extra things that you've just mentioned, Jan, the work that you're doing, the thoughts that you haven't had, and the direction that you need to take, aren't actually going to impact on the actual text of the report as it stands today. Is that right?
No, they're not, Chair. But but the report still has to go through a proper sign-off process, and because of the delays in completing the field work that I alluded to earlier, we've not had an opportunity to do that. And the report does deal with some very sensitive and complex matters, and it is normal practice, for audit reports to where they touch on those kinds of issues, to allow time for the statutory officers to fully consider them. And when I say the statutory officers, I'm not talking about just me in the context of exercising my Section 114 powers, but the monitoring officer also has a statutory responsibility in relation to unlawful expenditure under Section 5 of the Local Government Act. So there is a need for us to have some collective discussion before the report comes forward, and to make sure that we are satisfied that it is comprehensive and has considered all of the relevant matters. So it's you can describe it as a quality assurance process, but there just hasn't been time for us to complete that. And I understand the impatience of the committee to have this report, but as you yourself have said, it's important that we actually allow ourselves the time and the space to get that right, because the consequences of not doing so could be very far-reaching.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Kevin, did you want to just finish on that?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, just to clarify, just an item that Jan alluded to there, and it's that of my reports to you as an audit committee being signed off. I have to be able to report to you independently and report to you directly without necessarily a sign-off of my reports, which underlines my independence. However, as Jan rightly points out, given the sensitivity of the matters which were included within that report, I shared it with the 3 statutory officers on the basis that it was kind of sensitive and obviously very, a very sort of sensitive matter. It's just to kind of be clear about the turn of phrase sign off, though, and just to kind of make sure that assurance is provided to committee around my independence in terms of reporting to you.
I think that's a point very well made, and I think I'm sure you would agree with that, Jan, is that Kevin...
Absolutely, Chair.
Yeah.
I apologise for my loose language. Kevin understands exactly what I meant, but yes, it's just to make sure that we've fully considered all of the different issues from a number of different angles. So that's what I meant. But Kevin's quite right. We don't sign off exactly. Kevin's reports.
It probably sounds like pedantry, but I think it probably is quite important that people understand.
It is
Kevin
indeed
has a direct line to this committee and doesn't have to go through any kind of permission to put a report to this committee. Kevin is empowered to actually directly give us reports. Okay, well, I think we know where we are with this. Councillor Jackson, you had a quick question.
I do understand the sensitivities involved, and actually to know that statutory officers have got these legal responsibilities to report to full council and fully understand that, and perhaps that's one of the governance mechanisms that should have been taken into account more in the past in this council as well. So I actually applaud the statutory officers for doing their job properly. And I also think that that we would be asking those questions as a committee, and we'd be looking for answers about the legal responsibilities of this council and where we stood in these matters. So I think it probably is right to do that work. We are, and it's been recognised, keen to actually see progress in this. and you know, we've heard at least most of the work has been done. So I do look forward to seeing it as soon as ever possible. But I wanted the work to be complete. I want the detail to be there for us as an audit committee, and that if all of the details is not laid before us, I'll be very upset because I just don't want this to be washed over. But I do want the council to do what it's legally obliged to do in relation to all of these matters, and you'll probably be taking sort of various bits of legal advice from various experts, I would imagine. So I'd like the report to be complete, but absolutely detailed. And if that requires some of the detail being put on pink paper just for this committee, then I will quite understand that. It needs to be a generally public report, but so some of it might relate to identifiable individuals, for example, and I can understand at this stage that some of it might have to be on pink paper, but to do this amount of work and to not have it properly detailed and a proper full report to the committee would be wrong. So I'll look forward to seeing progress on this at the next meeting.
Absolutely, Councillor. I think the key thing, as I said earlier on, is we are impatient to see the report, but at the same time we are mindful that this has to be right. This is a big issue, and it's something which has to have a thorough investigation before we actually get to see it. But when we get to see it, we do hope that it will be sufficiently detailed and nuanced with enough information in there for the committee to actually know that it is getting the correct information that we need to make the decision, to make the scrutiny that we have to give to this one. Peter Topping, you had a hand up just a minute ago.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered whether you had the diaries to take receipt of the report in advance of the next meeting.
My understanding is yes to that one, because as Kevin mentioned earlier, Kevin has a direct line to the Audit Committee Chair. There is no letter hindrance between that. You don't have to have anything signed off by anybody else. Whether we should do that is another question, because quite clearly, although Kevin can do that, I don't think that in this instance there would be a need to do that, because we are going through the process, and as Jan has said, it's going to be carefully worked through. We're going to actually go through the process. I don't feel personally the need to actually go beyond that process and take anything outside of that process. So yes, we can, but I think in this case, no, I'm not going to ask Kevin to do that at the present time, because I think that would be unnecessarily, well, it just wouldn't be necessary in this case. We have got a process which is going to work its way through. We've been assured we'll get something in the January committee. I think we will be getting something in the January committee, I'm absolutely certain. Councillor Oliver, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think the eyes of the world are on us following the Cala report, and we need to be demonstrating, you know, and in the context of the Challenge Board as well, we need to be demonstrating that we are taking scrutiny and governance and assurance very, very seriously. So it is disappointing that a report that's been produced hasn't made it to today's committee. I understand the reasons, but I would just seek an absolute cast iron assurance that it will definitely appear at the next meeting in January. And also that the external auditor will be kept fully appraised of all of the findings because I think that's really important too.
Okay.
Just to reassure Councillor Oliver, the Section 151 officer has kept us appraised of progress in terms of both this and the international investigation. So there's no risk whatsoever that we've not been kept in the loop in terms of how things are going in timely.
Thank you, Cameron. Yes, I think that's what we would have expected, and I think this gets back to Peter's point there. Should we do this? Well, we could do this, but no, we shouldn't, because I think the process is working and has been adhered to and is going through. Jan is keeping the right people in the loop. Kevin has kept Jan in the loop, and so on, and everybody is communicating as we'd expect. It's a disappointment that we haven't had the report to this committee, because we are obviously kind of keen to see this. But as I said earlier on, I think I'll be prepared to wait another few weeks and get a good report with all the texture and nuance we want to see in there, than actually jump the gun at this late stage. We have waited a long time for this information, so I think it's going to be valuable information for us as a committee and for external audit as well when it finally arrives. So if we can sort of maybe park that one at that point, because I think we have got a definite commitment to get this report to us for January. And thank you for your input on that, Jan. So we take your points on board entirely, and we understand this is a really sensitive issue, and you have to take this one very, very carefully. So we're looking forward to seeing what comes to us in January in this particular report. And I'm more than happy to have a discussion in between now and January as to which part of this meeting this report has to fall into. Because obviously if it is particularly sensitive, it might well be that we consider where we place this meeting, or even if we call a separate extraordinary meeting to talk about the report in camera, if necessary. All options, as far as I'm concerned, are on the table at the present time. Not having seen the report, we'll wait until we see what comes of it. So if we're okay with that one, we'll move on to the last item on this pack. The update on the independent review of international, a report to be presented to the November meeting. Well, we do have a verbal update on our agenda from John Gilbert, so that will be coming through shortly, so that one can be ticked off. Okay, we move on to the standard work programme for November. Internal audit and risk management, the key outcomes from internal audit assignments, strategic audit plan and monitoring statement, yes. Corporate finance and treasury management in-year update report, yes, that's on. New position statement on audit committees, yes. Draft annual governance statement, that one, yes, that's okay. External audit strategy memorandum 21-22, which was deferred, yes. Update on the 21-22 statement of accounts. Counter fraud annual report, which was deferred from September, is on. The group audit committee update report, yes. And report requests from members, update on the independent review and international and audit committee arrangements, SIPFA report are all on. So I think we're pretty much on line with all of those on the work programme. So that's good.
Chair, may I just interject on the draft annual government statement for 21-22?
Yes,
that work is in train, but as the 2021 accounts and associated governance statement has not yet been certified, we are holding that over. So that's the reason why that draft statement isn't on the agenda today.
Yeah, it tends to roll on. I think I probably said that one is okay, because I think we're expecting that one will roll on until we get to that point. But yes, it hasn't appeared today, but it will roll on to the next meeting.
Indeed, Chair. And the only other thing I was going to request is we have Mr. Gilbert here today to give an update on the international review. Chair, I wondered whether you would mind taking that item a bit earlier so that Mr. Gilbert doesn't have to stay for the whole meeting.
Well, I think we've got that one on next, Jan, actually.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
Apologies if I've missed that, Chair.
No, that's the next item on our list. So, okay, we can close off the monitoring report and action log now if everybody's happy with that, and we'll move on to item number 5. Is John joining us by Teams link?
Yes, I am. If you can hear me.
Hello, John. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're going to give us just a quick update of how things are going in this area. So can you the floor's yours.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep, you're fine.
Yep, great. Okay. Yes, it was just to give you a verbal update as to the work of the international, just to remind you. Obviously, this work came out of the issuing of the 114 notice, which you were talking briefly about earlier, actually, in the sort of CALA report. And part of that was issued on the 8th of June. An element of that was regarding international and the work of international and the aspects that surrounded that. You will be very aware that yourselves as an audit committee then set out 10 questions that needed to be followed up with the work of international. I was appointed approximately mid-October this year to undertake this work. I then, to give a little bit of a background, I then had access to over 500 documents and still counting, which equates to about 16,000 different pages. So there's a lot of information that I've been reading through. I would have interviewed approximately 20 people over the period of time, and they range from past and present staff, past and present councillors, as well as senior NHS trust and even the external auditor. So I've tried to be as comprehensive and as thorough as possible. There are individuals that I would have liked to have spoken to, but upon contacting them, they felt either they were reluctant to take part or felt too ill to relive some of their past experiences. And as this is a voluntary, not a compulsory review, then obviously that's their choice to do that. But there are some individuals that I would have liked to have spoken to. In terms of methodology, obviously I've read a lot of the information and I will keep reading it because it's a bit like you mentioned earlier on, Chair, about a jigsaw puzzle, and that's what it feels like, trying to put the various bits together. And what I've done is set out the 10 questions and interviewed every individual going through those 10 questions. I've then sent back to those individuals the comments that were recorded and made for them to say, yes, this is a true recording, this is a true translation of what we spoke about. Some individuals have chosen to also send me further documentation that I've obviously read through and reading through in order to support any particular issues that they may have. What I've also I'm in the process now of going back and, if you like, just translating any issues or just filling any gaps of information where they've got no evidence to suggest something. So I want to make sure this is a complete evidence-based approach. This is a lessons learned report. And this is really about hoping, yes, we've got to look back to see what went wrong and what we could have done better. But in particular, this is around trying to make sure the lessons learned about what you can put in place going forwards. I think that's particularly important. So the purpose of the risk report is not to clarify the issuing of the 114 notice, which led to the unlawful expenditure, which you've approved and agreed in June this year, because this was supported by the QC Nigel Griffin. But it doesn't seek to necessarily to attribute individual blame for omissions, but really more of a generic sense across the whole system. What I'm also making sure I try and do is, where applicable, I've tried to comment upon the context that was prevalent across the organisation at that time under the investigation. I think it's important. It's very easy when we look at these things in hindsight. Why wasn't that done? Why was this done? Looking at the context of the organisation at that time is quite important. So what I'm trying to do through the report, as I'm going through each question, I'm trying to respond to them as best I can in a chronological way. So it really paints a story as you're looking at that. Otherwise, there's a number of these questions that overlap, and I don't want to repeat myself in question 1 and question 3 and question 4, but it's more of a story of as we're going through, which hopefully gives you more of a contextual oversight as what's happening. I think that really the one thing I need to make sure is I want to make sure that the report is around evidence. I think a member was speaking earlier on about making sure that the evidential support is there. What I can't do, I'm not at liberty to report on information which can be deemed as subjective, speculative, hearsay, or of a personal bias. And as you would imagine, in the context of this, there was an element of that I was picking up for a number of individuals. And as much as that I can understand that feeling from people, I can't necessarily evidence that X spoke to Y in a particular way. I wasn't there, none of us were there other than those individuals, but if there's reported or documentary evidence that supports a particular report was taken somewhere and agreed, then that's easier to comment upon. I think, just to finish on that, well, I think the way that I'm trying to write the report, I'm in the draft stage at the moment, Chair, and you can imagine, if you go back to the Calla report, there are three ex-chief executives over a period of 3 months writing that report and doing the work. There's one chief executive, I myself, doing this in about 6 or 7 weeks. So obviously I'm up against it in time, which is why I'll be looking to report with your permission to your next committee in January and come with a report at that stage. The way I'm trying to set the report out is with the overview and background to give that strategic overview, the methodology that sits underneath it, and the executive summary and observations that are prevalent. Then I will be going through each question and a detailed analysis of each question with supporting key findings under each question, and then finally a summary of key recommendations going forwards of what you need to put in place. And I'm considering whether to put some of those that may well be immediate, some of those may well be longer term responses. So that's the process I'm at the moment. I'm more than happy to take any questions, Chair, and I hope that just gives you a flavour of the work to date. But I'm still getting information. I'm still interviewing 1 or 2 people, which are just literally finalising the dates. Jan's PA has been extremely helpful in helping me, Sally Plant, and helping diary commitments and appointments for me. We're hoping to do that, complete that fairly soon. And I'm just at now, as I say, at the draft stage of putting the report together. But I'm now just, if you like, cross-checking with a few individuals and following up with a few individuals where there's some gaps. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, John. That was an excellent summary of the work in progress and how you're doing it. Just a quick one from me. It's interesting, and I do appreciate that you are taking this evidence-based approach, because obviously that is exactly what we want. But I suppose there is also the element of repeated affirmations by people you've been interviewing, which match between individual people, but can't be evidenced. Have you come across any instances where the same story effectively has been repeated across the line, but you can't actually provide any evidence of that? How would you approach that? Would that just be omitted from the report, or would you actually capture that somewhere?
No, it's a good question, Chair. And the way that I would be looking at the answer to your question is there are elements of that where there's a common theme, if you like, that cuts across. I don't think there'll be any surprise to any member in the room to say that there's much that you can reflect upon the Colour report. There's elements of governance that, if you like, comes through a DNA, like the DNA through this in relation to poor report keeping, too many informal meetings. I mean, things that you'll probably be very, very aware of where things have taken place. Obviously, what I'm trying to do, it's for you as a committee, if you feel there are things that you can take further, whether it's a disciplinary nature or whatever, that's for you to look at. But many of the individuals that perhaps were involved at that time have left the organisation and are no longer with you. I think the thing that's coming to me, and I think, again, going back to the Colour report, and indeed other reports that you yourselves have had as an audit committee going back several years, that actually it's around governance across the whole system and across the organisation as a whole. That's something that I think you need to consider.
Thank you for that, John. That's excellent. I'll open it up to the committee. Has anybody got any particular questions for John while we have him? No? I'm taking that as people are fairly comfortable with what you're doing, and John, and how you're doing it. So that's good. And I must admit, I do think that you've got a difficult job here, but I think that the approach that you've outlined obviously is very, very robust. So we're looking forward to seeing this report coming through. As we said in an earlier discussion, we'd rather get these reports right with the right level of detail in than get them necessarily quickly. So we can wait, and we're looking forward to seeing this one with plenty of information in there from these different interviews that you've carried out. So thank you very much for the work you've done, and thank you for giving us the update. A quick one from Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, just make a general point. Thank you for that overview of the work, and we would look forward to seeing the detailed report. I think what it shows to me as a committee member is the benefit of getting someone external, an external expert to come in and do this with a fresh pair of eyes and approach it with a clean sheet. So we do look forward to seeing the report in January. Yeah, absolutely. I can certainly echo those comments. So thank you very much, Councillor Jackson, and thank you, John, for presenting to us this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.
Thanks very much. Goodbye. Okay. Moving on. Now, your agenda says report of head of the Internal Audit and Risk Management. We're going to put that item further down the agenda because Cameron has to get away fairly quickly. So we're going to move the Mazars report further forward. So we'll bring that on now. Cameron, if you're in a position to give us a quick rundown.
I'll do my best to be quick, Chair. So in terms of the 2021-22 audit, this report was deferred from September. It just wasn't going to be ready quickly enough. What that hasn't done is stopped us actually commencing the testing, and we've actually done quite a lot already in terms of the council's accounts. You'll see from the report that from a timing point of view, we are aiming to conclude and report the audit. It'll probably be March now, Chair, but that will still put us in a good position for the 22-23 audit, which is the final audit under the current contract, you'll be aware. In terms of approach, we are obviously the auditor of the group, not just a single entity council accounts. You'll see from the report that we do place reliance on the audit of Advance. So once that work is complete, and I think that's scheduled as well, Jan, around about, it's ongoing at the moment, but it's probably going to be a bit later than ideal, but should still be in time in terms of group reporting. So what we do is we review all of the work that's undertaken by the component auditor, which is a separate Mazars team, and where necessary, where we feel that we need to do a little bit of top-up testing, which was the case for 2021, we will perform that ourselves in the new year. I'm optimistic we won't have to do top-up testing this year, having discussed that with the engagement team for Advance already on a number of occasions. In terms of experts, worthwhile just highlighting those because they're quite relevant to the key risk areas in the accounts. You'll be aware that you have got defined benefit pension liability in your accounts, quite a big figure. So you use an actuary engaged via South Tyneside Council and Tyneware Pension Fund. They provide you with a letter each year that goes into the accounts, and then we carry out a programme of work in relation to that. The National Audit Office appoint a consulting actuary for all of the suppliers to public sector bodies in local government. What they do is they look across all the actuaries in the public sector, compare things like assumptions, etc., and the methodology to make sure that they are in line with expectations. And they also highlight some extra tests that auditors have to do, individual entities, which we do each year, including for Northumberland. In terms of property, plant and equipment, this has probably been the biggest area of issues with Northumberland. Indeed, quite a lot of councils across the country over the last few years. There's very high regulatory expectation on auditors around about the amount of work and scrutiny in that area. Again, you've changed your valuer recently. We look at that critically. We use there's something called Gerald Eve report. What they do is they produce some expected movements. They give us some advice around about methodology expected in terms of different types of valuation processes you have to use. And if we need to, we have engaged our own internal valuation team to look at certain things. So that work's ongoing. I think we're going to have a few issues again this year, which is sort of understandable because it's one of the more complicated areas. You've got a new valuer in place, and when we tend to find that things change a little bit because they have different ways of doing things. And then financial instruments, which sounds a lot more glorious than it actually is. It's basically the way you account for things like debtors, creditors, loans, investments, cash in your accounts, because those are all financial instruments. You use Link Asset Services. Just about everybody in local government uses Link Asset Services. There's one or two others, but the bulk of my clients use Link. We don't actually use our own experts in that because actually it's relatively straightforward to do it once you actually understand the nature of the instruments. And also Northumberland County Council's financial instruments aren't particularly complicated. Thankfully, you're not like some of the councils you may have read about in the press that have entered in some very interesting investment portfolios that may be causing them one or two issues now in terms of their long-term financial, well, actually short-term financial sustainability. In terms of risk, you're aware of management override of controls. That is a risk everywhere. We focus our attention on key estimates in your accounts. We do a lot of testing on things called journals. Journals are the manual adjustments you make through the accounts that go through a system through somebody, a person. And for example, one of the things we look at is whether or not Jan, as a Section 151 officer, is authorised a load of journals and put them through the accounts. Because our view would be if the Section 151 officer is actually doing that, then there's probably something wrong. Although most Section 151 officers, when asked them that question, say, I would have no idea how to put a journal through the ledger. In terms of other risks, I mentioned defined benefit pension liability. It's a big figure. We do some work on that ourselves, but one of the fundamentals we rely on is the auditor of Town and Weir Pension Fund. We ask Town and Weir Pension Fund auditor a series of questions each year, and we have asked them a few extra questions this year because the regulator, following file reviews undertaken in 2021, has said there are some areas where all auditors need to challenge the information they're provided from the pension fund itself. We have not got that assurance yet, so you'll be aware that the deadline for publishing audited accounts this year is the 30th of November. We have not got that assurance yet from the Town and Weir Pension Fund auditor. It's not a criticism. I imagine they've probably got exactly the same issues we've got, but nevertheless, we haven't got that assurance. So even if we had finished everything on Northumberland, we would not be in a position to sign off today. So it's worth bearing that in mind. What we also don't know, Jan, yet is whether or not there are any fundamental issues in the audit of Town and Weir Pension Fund that might mean the County Council has to request an updated actuarial letter for the accounts. We just don't know that yet. We won't know that until we have got that letter. Moving on to property, plant and equipment, that's a risk. It's to do with valuation uncertainty because valuers use a lot of different sources of information, make a lot of assumptions, lots of estimates to come up with a number that goes into your accounts. Now, you'd probably be aware that the main impact that would have on your I&E account is depreciation or an impairment. You're also probably aware, I hope, that a statutory override that's in place reverses the impact that has on your reserves. So it has no bottom line impact on essentially council taxpayers for the county council. But it is still a really big number, and the regulator expects, rightly so, that we comply with auditing standards, and we do a lot of work on that area. That's the area my gut feeling, Jan, is probably going to have the most issues again this year. And we're discussing with Jan and her team as and when things arise in that area. Although some of the issues we have flushed in prior years have been addressed, worth noting that. We have an enhanced risk on around about PFI just because they're an estimate and there's a model you've got to follow. We've done quite a lot of work about this in prior years. In our first year, we did an awful lot of work understanding the models. We don't think there's a real significant risk here, but we do think it's enhanced. And we're not anticipating anything coming out of this, but that's probably famous last words from an auditor now. But I would expect not. The issue we've not got in your accounts, which I do need to talk about, because if I don't, Jan will probably mention the fact I've forgotten all about it, is infrastructure assets, which we've talked about a few times in the past. So you'll recall this is the way you account for your roads, bridges, culverts, etc. So, if you recall previously, I highlighted the fact that to resolve this issue quickly in the current context of the Code of Practice without a statutory override would be quite tricky and an awful lot of work for the County Council and unlikely to be done very quickly. We're aware that some audit firms have agreed with councils to qualify the accounts on that issue. We are not going down that route. However, you may or may not be aware that the civil service has a sense of humour, which I certainly wasn't aware of until infrastructure came along. But what has happened is that there was a consultation that ended on the 7th of December around about the implementation of a statutory override by the Minister, basically, alongside an amendment to the Code of Practice that you have to follow in preparing your accounts. What that does essentially is it puts in a short-term fix that will allow Jan to amend her accounts, which she will need to do, allows us to carry out some work in January, and I'm saying January for a reason I'll come back to allow us to conclude that either the accounts are or aren't materially misstated after the application of the statutory override and the revision to the code. Now, the reason I think the civil service has got a sense of humour is because the date of implementation of the statutory override is the 25th of December 2022. And nobody, I would have thought, without a sense of humour, would have come up with that date. Which is a bit frustrating, to be honest, because I think we all probably hoped it was a little bit earlier. Jan certainly would have done, because she would have been in a position where she probably could have gone through and actually amended the accounts. Potentially she could do that now, but there's a risk between now and then something else comes along to amend that. So We will give an update on that in a January progress report, just in terms of where things are at and what council have done and what we've done as a result of that. Moving forward to the audit completion report, probably scheduled for March. So I'm optimistic. I'm more optimistic now than I was a month ago. I'm not sure if I'm less or about the same level of optimism from about 3 months ago when this was first mooted. But I'm hoping that the resolution on 25th December all happens. That puts Jan and her team in a position to amend the accounts, puts us in a position to know exactly what we need to do the audit work, which I'm hoping shouldn't be too much, because we've spent a bit of time on infrastructure over the last couple of years, which you might remember because we've reported that a couple of occasions now about some of the issues you've had. So that's probably a biggie. That moves me to value for money. We have said that we have not formally concluded our risk assessment. That is true. Part of the reason for that is we are waiting on the report that John Gilbert has just highlighted, but also the report that Kevin and his team have been undertaking in terms of termination packages relevant to the current year. But you won't be surprised to hear that the fundamental work we will be doing in 21-22 is looking at the progress the council has made since the CALA report, since the Section 114 notices were issued by Jan, to ascertain the processes and arrangements that have been put in place to address those issues, and also progress to date in undertaking them. I'm not going to predetermine what the result of that work will be in terms of reporting. My gut feeling will be that we don't issue a new recommendation. What we will do is retain the recommendation we are shortly to make, and highlight the fact it's not yet been fully addressed. That is an option under the code. That's where I think we'll land. Sorry, Jan, I've not had time to just run that past you before the meeting, but it's been a work in progress. In terms of fees, you will see that those are in line with the contract we have with PSA, the scale fees that are issued. There will be additional fees related to some of the other extra work we've had to do over the last couple of years. We don't think it's appropriate to actually discuss those with Jan, report those to the audit committee till we've actually signed the audits off and completed them, because otherwise we've not finished. And you'll also see that there is some non-audit work we do for the council. Those are fine. They are what are called audit-related assurance services. So non-audit work slightly misleading, and those are to do with returns that you must submit to various government departments, which require some form of audit certification before those are submitted. So we've engaged with Jan around about those three pieces of work, around about a pulling return, which relates to any capital receipts from selling of housing or housing-related assets, teachers' pensions, which is basically a return back to Teachers' Pensions Agency around about how much you've spent and how much of that is pensions, and also around about benefits, which is to do with the amount of benefits you paid over the 12 months to 31st March 22. We anticipate all of those being signed off in the very near. Benefits will be a bit later because the deadline's a bit later, but the other two will be done in the next couple of months. From an independence point of view, we are not at this stage not aware of any independence issues. If there are any arise between now and concluding the audit, we will report those to the committee, having discussed this with Jan first. And just importantly, just to draw your attention to materiality, because that is a key context in terms of what we do audit-wise, both in terms of the accounts and also in terms of value for money considerations. And you'll see there that broadly the threshold for the council is around about 18 million. It's based on how much the council spends. That's not changed. Our benchmark is between 1% and 2% of that. We tend to consistently apply about 2 for all of our large council clients. And then performance materiality is the level we test at. So anything above performance we test. And you'll see the group materiality slightly higher because it's a combination of the council materiality plus a bit of the group. You might ask me why is that the difference is only 600,000 given advance spend quite a bit. It's because there's some consolidation adjustments that we take into account between the council and advance in terms of who pays whom what. And trivial is quite important because below that level we would not traditionally report that to the audit committee. There is an exception to that. The exception to that is around about member allowances, where we apply a much lower threshold, senior officer remuneration, where we apply a lower threshold, and relevant to the conversation we've just been having earlier, termination packages, exit packages as well, where again we apply a lower threshold. I can't remember if we've covered it at a previous meeting, so I'll cover it now, Jan, if that's okay, about officer remuneration. So you recall back to June, the Section 114A notice in relation to the international allowance. We have taken internal advice around about the implications that has for audit reports, and our advice is that, the advice to me is that as your engagement lead, I do not need to qualify the accounts on that, as long as Jan and her team suitably amend disclosure in the accounts to make it clear what's happened, the consideration under Section 114A and the implications of that, which I think we've agreed already, Jan, that that will happen. That will be relevant to 2021 and 21-22. In relation to termination packages, regardless of everything that's been discussed today, purely from an accounts point of view, our determination in terms of qualify or not qualify and or disclosure will be informed by the advice that Jan takes, the action Jan takes, and therefore any action we deem necessary on our part. That's separate to VFM. That's just solely to do with the opinion on the financial statements. So I don't think I've got anything else to say, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions. That should be said, infrastructure broadly across the entire country. If you take the UK as a whole, Scotland put in place the statutory override very quickly after the issue arose. So it's not an issue up in Scotland. In England, it is an issue for every council that's got material infrastructure assets, which broadly speaking is every metropolitan council, unitary council like yourselves, and county council. And there are a few districts who have got some material infrastructure assets as well, which is a bit unusual. But certainly the only councils that will get signed off are the ones that have got qualified opinions in infrastructure.
Okay, thanks for that, Cameron. It's admirably clear, as always. It's interesting to get civil service jokes and optimism from the external auditor in the same report.
Well, I wouldn't go as far as optimism.
I think
Chair,
I did
cautious optimism might be more
I did make
accurate.
it up with the word optimism, so I think we'll get that in the minutes if we can. Okay, well, thanks. Any particular questions for Cameron while he's still here on this one? Okay, well, thank you, Cameron. That was very good. If you need to get away.
I do. The main reason I've got to go is because I've got an external quality control review this afternoon, so I need to be there when they actually turn up to review the files.
Right, okay. Well, thank you for that. That was excellent. So we move on. So the item that we placed on the agenda, okay, was number 6, which is Audit Committee Arrangements, a report from the Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management. So it's over to Kevin on this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, which is known as CIPFA, regularly produce guidance, which includes guidance on the operation of local authority audit committees. That guidance, members will be aware, includes a position statement on audit committees and a self-assessment template regarding kind of best practice. And we've previously completed that self-assessment and presented to audit committee in the past. I know we've touched on this in the last couple of meetings, that we've been awaiting updated guidance from CIPFA on this. That was then eventually published in October. That guidance contains an updated position statement on audit committees and also includes an updated self-assessment template for audit committees to consider. So the report outlines the changes it took. We've got a copy of the updated position statement in there, and then we've got a new completed self-assessment which we've completed in conjunction with the Chair and Vice Chair. And obviously it recognises that in the main we are compliant with the guidance in the position statement. There are some amendments to make to our terms of reference to recognise the updated position statement and make sure that we are fully compliant with that. We'll obviously make sure that that's done as part of the updating of the Constitution at the next time, hopefully in May, when that's done at the annual meeting of Council, and we'll make all those changes hopefully ready for then. And the main point in terms of the self-assessment and the adherence, if you like, to the guidance relates to an annual report from Audit Committee to full Council, which I know we've talked about before, and we thought during the year, and again in discussion with the Chair and Vice Chair, that it was probably made more sense for us in terms of adding value to that report to await the updated guidance, undertake this exercise of the self-assessment and also the proposed wider review, with audit committee members and the chair to look at the effectiveness of our audit committee and then use that information to provide to form the basis of that annual report from the committee to council. Chair, I wouldn't propose to say any more than that, but more than happy for any, perhaps not even questions, but comments from members of the committee, because this is supposed to be a self-assessment by the committee. So happy for any comments from committee members, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Yes, it is a self-assessment. It is a committee input driven process, and we have had, as you said, Kevin, discussions between myself, yourself, and David Towns as Councillor Towns as our deputy chair. Obviously, the document you see as Appendix B in this was sort of largely put together following those discussions. That's probably something that's worth the committee really focusing on, probably in this meeting, just in case anybody has spotted something that they don't appreciate, understand, or agree with. Because obviously this has been syndicated before the meeting, so I think everybody had an email with this attached to it, so they have actually had a chance to look at it. I didn't see any particular comments coming back from this.
No. Chair, there was one comment back from a committee member, but it was probably more related to, rather than the self-assessment, something that we may wish to consider as part of the wider review, and touched along actually on the point Jan made earlier about interaction with scrutiny committees, and it was more looking at how we bottom some of that out and think about how audit committee may wish to interact with other committees, but ensuring that the lines of responsibility and role aren't blurred. So it was linked in with that comment which actually was made earlier. So a valid point, but perhaps not one for the self-assessment, more for having a think around it as part of a wider review.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a thing that is at the forefront of people's minds at the minute, is how do the different committees actually communicate and work together. We've already discussed not repeating the same work over and over again, and nobody wants to do that, but also making sure we don't blur the lines along the way, so one committee doesn't think it's doing the work of another committee. And I think it's very easy for audit committee to fall into that trap of thinking that it's doing the work of scrutiny or whatever, when actually it isn't. So I think we need to think about that in the broader realm. But specifically for this report, if we have any questions on it, we'll take them, or if not, we'll assume that this is acceptable to the committee. Can you say show of hands? Is that a question there, Councillor Jackson?
Yeah, well, just a comment, really. I think the audit committee has obviously evolved, and there were some real issues. So if you filled this form out for the audit committee 4 or 5 years ago, there wouldn't be many boxes where you could actually tick fully complies. You'd be sort of further down the scale quite a lot. No, I do think things have improved quite dramatically, but it's just that feeling that where you've sort of ticked the 5-star box. It gets a feeling as a committee member that that box is ticked, therefore we're not going to improve anymore. And I got that feeling from this report, whereas I still think there are things we can improve. And there's one, number 25, is quite an important one. Does the committee make recommendations for the improvement of governance, risk and control arrangements? Well, yes, we do. But I think sometimes we and it was said in the last committee meeting, really. So sometimes we probably don't do it quite enough, and we probably don't use the full muscle and ability of the audit committee just to make absolutely sure that the governance of this organisation is right. I just don't want to be too self-satisfied with it. Is basically the comment that I've got.
Yeah, I think that's a point well made, and I think unless you wanted to pick that up, Kevin, but I was just reading your commentary box there, and it says, particularly on that one, Councillor Jackson, does the committee make recommendations for the improvement of governance, risk and control arrangements? I think the comments say it would not be usual for recommendations from audit committee to be made regularly, but this is a facility which audit committee has utilised when appropriate. I think that's probably accurate. I think it has been done when it was needed to be done, not necessarily overused, but it has been done. But I do take your point.
Just to expand on that, and particularly at the moment when the whole organisation is looking at governance controls, and as a result of the Colour report in particular, we did have a discussion before about that, and there's probably just a little bit more that we can add value to that going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a point well made. Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to Councillor Jackson's point around resting on laurels or everything like that, I think you're quite right, Councillor Jackson, and I think that was something that we actually talked about when we completed the self-assessment and whether we put it in the fully compliant or the next one down. And one of the key themes, I think, that came from the discussion around this, which I would see forming a part of the wider review that we've suggested, is around training and really sort of thinking about what sort of training committee members and the committee as a whole would benefit from. I think it's something we could really sharpen up on without not being disrespectful to any committee members, but I think it's sort of recognised that actually kind of having a structured training programme would be of benefit for the committee, and I think that ties in with your points, Councillor Jackson, about just making sure that we're keeping on top of best practice and we're kind of looking to continually improve. Yeah.
Absolutely, I think I would agree with that, Kevin. Certainly about the point about training, because we have excellent audit committee members here. Some of them weren't excellent committee members when they started, but have grown into excellent committee members. But that's partly by attending committees and the process of osmosis, if you like, of learning what the committee's about. I think maybe we need a more structured kind of approach to committee, so everybody gets the same message on the same page at the same time, if you like. We'd rather have everybody at the same level of understanding of what committee's about, the remit of committee is, what we should and should not be doing, etc., and the nitty-gritty detail of that, rather than people learning at different paces and at different times. So I think that's something that we definitely need to take forward. So Councillor Oliver, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Just a sort of a general comment. I think so one of the key themes, I think, is independence. And I think there's massive improvement now. We have an independent chair, and we've got another independent member, and I think that's really good. But also, there's a point, I think it was point 3, about the committee maintaining its advisory role and not taking on decision-making powers. I think that's also an important factor for the internal audit service, and I think it was good to hear Kevin make that point earlier on about his sort of independence. I don't think that has always been the case, and I think there's been an overlap. I think, and I just think we need to bake in with the work that's being done with the constitutional change to make sure that that can never happen again. We've got a situation because obviously things did happen previously. And they didn't come through the audit committee properly, or they didn't come through the internal audit investigations properly, or and I think that independence is absolutely key to making sure that all functions efficiently. I also think it's important that and it's good to see sort of very senior officers attending audit committee regularly, but I think we should have senior members attending as well, because I think it's important that the administration, and I'm part of that administration, but it understands what's sort of going on and what the concerns are, and I'm sure there'll be informal mechanisms for feeding that back, but that's an important point too.
Absolutely. I think we probably agree with both of those points. I don't think anybody would have a dispute about that. I've been pleased at the time since I've been chairing these meetings at how many senior officers from the council actually attend. It's quite refreshing actually to see so many people who are engaged enough in the work of this committee to come along and to actually make an impression on the committee and an input into the committee. I think you make a good point about senior councillors as well. Maybe need to have a standing brief to drop in if they want to, or maybe on particular interest points for them. Maybe that's something we need to think about going forward. It goes to Councillor Jackson's point, is we can't rest on our laurels and think we've got the perfect model already. We haven't. We've still got work to do, but I think we're moving there. And I think that's the key thing. And I think one of your points I absolutely agree with, and that is we must fiercely defend the independence of the internal audit service. they must have that direct line to us as a committee, and there must be no let a hindrance in the internal auditors bringing things to this committee that they consider to be important and material, because otherwise we lose that independent line of communication and input into the committee. So I think I agree with that point entirely, Councillor. I think it's a good report, Kevin. I think I'm not saying that because it's partly involved in it, but I think it is a very good report. And I think it gives us a good way forward to actually to start improving things further at the committee. So unless anybody's got any further points on this one, I think we've been asked to, on point 2 there, to consider and endorse the latest self-assessment of our audit committee arrangements against the good practice guidance. So we have to take a show of hands on that one, I think. So can we endorse that? Yes, I think that's pretty unanimous. Thank you very much. And we also have to agree that the Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management works with the Chair of the Audit Committee to undertake a wider review of the Audit Committee arrangements using the revised SIPFA guidance. So we can happily do that, and Kevin and myself will take that forward. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for that, Kevin. It's a very good report. Moving on. Again, this is yourself, I think, Kevin. It's the key outcomes from internal audit reports issued between May and October of this year.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, this is a report which we bring to the May and November meetings of Audit Committee each year. As Audit Committee know, we prepare a plan of work every year and agree that plan of work in March. We then have to deliver that plan. And as those pieces of work are finalised, we then bring this report to committee twice yearly, just with a summary of the audit work that we've completed within the last sort of 6-year period, and just provide Audit Committee with that overview of what that work entailed and what we found. So on page 47 of the papers is the sort of the landscape page format, which I know the committee will be familiar with, where we, as we say, we just take the 8 pieces of work which have been finalised since May, and then just on each page give a summary of each of those pieces of work with an indication of what the audit was, what the objective of the work was, the assurance opinion which we gave, recommendations which we made, good practice that we found, and a summary of some of the main issues that we identified, and then what's happened since, and that progress made we've shared with each relevant client, just to make sure that if the client wanted to add any comment into that, that was added in if appropriate, just so that committee got a rounded and balanced view of the work that we do. Chair, again, I wouldn't propose to go through in detail. We obviously then undertake some evidence checking, which is sort of alluded to in paragraph section 5, and then an idea of the sort of additional work that we've done, which wouldn't necessarily result in a report being issued. But happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Any questions on this one? Councillor Oliver.
I'm not sure if it's relevant to this committee. It might have come up in corporate services scrutiny, and apologies, I just can't remember. But the Communities Together grant payments was something that we've sort of previously considered. And I think there was a promise that members would be circulated with a kind of breakdown of where that money has gone. And we've never seen that. It may not have been audit, it may have been corporate service, but presumably that exists because that's kind of the work you're doing. And
thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor, I think you're right. I don't recall that conversation, so I'm assuming it must have been the scrutiny committee. But obviously we can chase that request up to make sure it goes out through scrutiny members. Thank you.
Okay, that's one probably to capture for our action part then, I think.
Chair, sorry, Councillor Grimshaw.
Yeah, just to finish that point.
Oh, sorry.
That is, Kevin, are you going to take that for the action part?
We'll go back to the relevant service. Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily an action for committee, but it's just to give assurance that I'll do that. Let's capture it. Scrutiny rather than
Okay, well, I had Councillor Grimshaw. I don't know, Peter Topping, you had your hand up a minute ago. Well, I'll take Councillor Grimshaw.
It's okay. If Peter had said for me, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, where you can't see him from where you're sitting, so I'll take Peter now. If it's okay.
No, I'm happy to defer to
we're such a polite committee. We're going to get nowhere at this rate, are we? Okay, well, Councillor Grimshaw.
Yes, I just wonder if we can have a little bit more clarification about the net support. And you know, with this current state of affairs, with you know people on tight budgets, etc. Just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on the nets, or is it too sensitive, or is it not in this area that we'll have to discuss these things?
Can you answer that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll do my best. Councillor Grimshaw. Yes, what we're kind of conscious of is we don't put too much detail in these reports, but we're more than happy to provide some additional detail to committee on that area if that would be just.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't mind if you did. That would be absolutely wonderful, Kevin. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Sorry,
Okay,
Peter.
We'll not capture that in the action plan because that's just an independent question from outside. That's great. Thank you. Peter Topping, an independent member.
All right, thank you, Chair. I was looking at page 48 and the ICT review, and it seems to me that there's some significant issues recorded here, including a single point of failure, just having one person capable of doing something, some, no escalation routes, inadequate testing, and I would suggest, I do note that business continuity is a planned internal audit for next year, and I would urge whoever is accountable for business continuity to take a very close look at these recommendations and the problems that have been highlighted, because I'm surprised that they're medium actually, but I'm not going to press that, but I think doesn't look good reading that summary.
Okay, Kevin, just to clarify what this particular report was looking at, because as soon as you see the word ICT and things, people tend to think, what on earth? It was looking at incident, problem and change management procedure. Presumably that's help desk where you've had a problem, you've had you can't get into your computer, whatever. Is that the sort of thing that we're talking about here?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose simplistically, yes. Probably a little bit more around where we have some major change going on and we may have a change request for a piece of work. But yes, I think I would take, I wouldn't disagree with Peter's point. Obviously, what we tried to do is give a flavour of the risk without giving the full details of the risk because it's a public document. And what I would say is that, as you would probably imagine, given the amount of I suppose dependency that any local authority has on its digital and ICT services, we work quite closely with colleagues in information services. And I know since we did this, I think they've already actioned 5 of the 8 recommendations. So the significance of the recommendations were immediately acknowledged and acted upon. And I think the business continuity aspects were more around specifically relating to the ICT programs rather than the wider business continuity within the wider authority across all services, which we pick up separately as part of a separate piece of work. So this just related specifically to this aspect of the IS work in terms of business continuity arrangements down there, but it will have a wider business continuity plan as part of wider arrangements.
Okay, is that okay, Peter, for your question? Okay, thank you. Just to continue on that one, just to pick up on, in the main issues identified and priority recommendations for this particular audit for ICT incident problem and change management, it said Change Advisory Board CAB meetings had not taken place for 4 months at the time of the audit, with approvals managed via email. Does that actually, if I'm reading that right, does that mean they were still actually meeting in a virtual way, or was it just that the meetings weren't happening at all?
Chair, I think it's my understanding that it's your understanding is correct. So whilst the meetings didn't take place, the relevant approvals were required virtually through email without a meeting to take place. And I think that's just sort of reflected in the recommendation to say it would be better if the meetings were taking place, because obviously what you don't get as part of a virtual approval is any opportunity for debate or discussion, which you would in a meeting to obviously maybe get to the nub of problems, if you like. But the approvals did happen. It's just the meetings weren't happening in accordance with what the policy or the procedures were in place at the time.
So the right person was rubber stamping, if for want of a better phrase, but there was no opportunity for somebody to question whether this was correct to rubber stamp it, so we lost that little bit of the jigsaw. So, I mean, it's not just a pedantic thing, is it? Because some of these changes are actually quite far-reaching for the council's services and infrastructure, aren't they?
Yes, Chair, certainly there can be, as I sort of alluded to, given the the reliance of any local authority on some of its digital platforms as we continue to move in that direction. Potentially, yes, we can have potentially some wide-ranging matters, and obviously we just sort of recommended that it would be better if those meetings took place properly as intended, rather than just getting approval through email.
Did they not hold these meetings by Teams? Everybody else uses Teams these days on the council?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair. No.
Okay, it's interesting. Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, I'm sort of reading through these audit reports, and I was just wondering, actually, the sort of recommendations and then progress made, action taken. How do we check up whether some of these things have actually been rectified or not? Because some of the recommendations are actually quite significant.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
What's the follow-up from here?
Yeah. What we do, there's probably a distinction where we talk about self-certification and then our team. So what we always get, as we've sort of alluded to in the text, is where we make a recommendation and that's all agreed. So a manager will say, yeah, we agree with the recommendation, this is what we'll do, and this is when we'll do it by. So then we would expect the service area to self-certify that they had implemented that recommendation. What we will then do in a variety of different ways is then do an evidence check to make sure that that is the case, and that, perhaps more importantly, that the background to the risk of the recommendation has been addressed, not just an action which hasn't had any outcome on the back of that, if that makes sense. So if we have an audit which receives a limited assurance opinion or a no assurance opinion, we automatically put a follow-up audit of that review on the following year's audit plan, where we will then go back and look at all of the recommendations in detail and almost re-perform the testing against those recommendations to get a bit of wider assurance that those recommendations and those outcomes have been implemented correctly. If we don't have a limited or a no assurance, if we have a reasonable or a significant assurance level, we will do evidence checking once the managers have self-certified that those recommendations have been implemented, and that's what we talk about in section 5. So no recommendation is ever lost. If it's not followed up directly as part of a follow-up piece of work, we undertake the evidence checking process. But clearly what we don't do is undertake an evidence checking process on a recommendation that the service area say they haven't implemented yet, because we'd just be telling them what they already know. So one of the things we've identified as a team is thinking around how we perhaps capture all of that information and present that toward a committee in a suitable format. At the moment, it's a little bit piecemeal. So it's almost that section 5, but it's, well, how many are outstanding, how many are being... So we've sort of thought about that as a bit of a service development area to think about that, to think what we don't want to do is flood out a committee with graphs and stats, but it's important that you get that assurance that actually those recommendations that we made are followed up in a comprehensive fashion. So that's something that we will give a little bit more thought to about how we present that to committee in future.
Does that answer your question, Councillor? Yeah, I think that's a really interesting little discussion there, because from what I've gleaned from it, Kevin, there is an element of self-certification attached to this, because probably resources are tight and you can't literally cover all the ground and double-check everything yourself. Do you, though, you sample, I think you're right, you sample some of these self-certifications and just check that they are actually carried out as you expected?
Yes, that's right, Chair. So if it was if it's a critical or a high or a medium recommendation, we will undertake that sample checking on recommendations once they've been self-certified as implemented. If it's within a report which has received a limited or a no assurance, we will look at all critical, high or medium recommendations as part of that follow-up. What we don't do is follow up on low priority recommendations, because they are by definition low priority. So we wouldn't prioritise the follow-up of a low priority recommendation.
And just to finish on this one, do you find occasionally that people think they've done something with the best will in the world? We very often get the wrong end of the stick and think that actually I've delivered that, when really you say, well, that isn't what we actually asked you to do. And does that actually happen? In which case, what's the recourse at that point?
Thank you. I think, Chair, that's a good question, and I think it would be fair to say that we've come across that in various organisations that I have audited in the past. So not necessarily within Northumberland County Council, but it may well have happened. And I think if I give an example of, sometimes we may make a recommendation to say, please, that shouldn't happen. And the recommend action, the management responsibility will send an email out to all staff to remind them not to do it, which they then duly do. But then we will undertake more testing and find it's still happening because it hasn't had the desired outcome. So the manager will say, well, I took the action, but the actual sort of outcome of what the recommendation was aimed to stop hasn't had that desired effect. Now, that's probably a historic matter, and I can't think of any fairly recently, and certainly not here at the County Council. And I think that what that made us do as a team is think very carefully about the wording of our recommendations, so that the recommendations are worded a little bit more accurately, if you like, just to make sure that we're making the point so that when the response from manager comes back, we can check to see, as part of the agreement of that report, that it's actually going to address the risk that the recommendation's aimed at.
That's good. I mean, the phrase obviously is hitting the target and missing the point, isn't it? It's that you can actually deliver something without actually getting any kind of positive outcome out of it, but you've delivered it, so you think you've ticked the box there. So that's what you're looking for. So you're alive to that. That's good. That was the only point I was trying to tease out, I suppose. So, any more questions for Kevin before we move on to the next item? Okay, that's great. Well, thank you very much for that, Kevin. It's, again, a good report. Right, next item on the agenda. Well, this is you again, Kevin. Strategic Order Plan 22-23, an interim monitoring statement.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, a report which we bring to each November meeting of committee. Obviously, as we've already discussed, we bring a plan of work to committee in March every year, and then in November we bring a report which is an interim monitoring statement against delivery of that plan of work at the end of September, so the midpoint in the year. So what the report sort of takes us through, the fact that it is a plan. It is a plan of best intentions at March every year for the year ahead, but it is only a plan at that point in time. The work of our team must flex and bend and react to emergent issues. We can't stick slavishly to a plan if that plan, as we move through the year, needs to change. So, for example, during the year, obviously, we've had to undertake additional work that we've already alluded to following the Section 114A report in May, which wasn't in the report. We did have a piece of work in the plan relating to the international arrangements, which was then superseded by the fact we've had an external investigation, which we've already heard from, and another area around grant certification, which is a growing and very important area of work for our team. I think we had £24 million worth of grant certification included within the plan for the first half of the year. We've had an additional 23.9 million hit us during the first half of the year, so we've actually had to certify £48 million worth of grants in the first 6 months. Clearly a hugely important thing for the council, so we have to divert a resource accordingly to undertake that additional work. So the plan and our work is kept under constant review, as you would expect, and just to make sure that we're on target in terms of meeting our plan of work as agreed, so that I can come back to you in May to deliver the annual opinion that I need to deliver. Obviously, what we also have to monitor following the cessation of the shared audit and risk service in March is the resources of the team, and that's something that we monitor regularly to make sure I have the resource to deliver the work that I need to deliver that opinion to you in May. So the plan on page 63 of the papers, Chair, is just the tables, which are the items which were included in the plan, which was agreed in March. And then in the final column is just a progress update against each of those items within the plan, showing where we've completed the work, where it's on target. We've obviously undertaken and finalisation of work from the previous year, because that does run over into years. And we've indicated where we have work planned for the second half of the year, potentially where we need to reprogram some work or reschedule some work, or where it's perhaps no longer required, as I've talked about, or where we've undertaken additional work. So, Chair, happy to take any questions from the committee.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. A very clear report. Good to see an awful lot of stuff on here which is underway, all completed, and still on target. So that's reassuring. So I'll open up the questions if anybody has any. No, that's good. Well, in that case, then we're only recommended to note and consider the progress set out in the strategic plan. So we have done. Thank you for presenting that. As I say, I think it's looking, fingers crossed, optimistic. So much stuff on target still. A lot can happen, of course, but let's fingers crossed that we hit those targets. That's good. Excellent. So we move on to item 9, and this one is our Section 151 officer, Jan, who I think is still on the line, and is the...
Yes, I am here, Chair.
Hello, Jan. Thank you. Thank you for hanging on there. It's maybe we should have brought this item a little bit further forward, then you could have... but lesson learned there.
Not a problem.
It's the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review Report for period 1st of April to 30th September 22, and this one's from yourself, Jan, so the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think this is probably one of the more interesting mid-year review reports that the committee will have received in recent years, because the Treasury management world has been turned on its head in the first half of this financial year. All of the assumptions that we made at the time the Treasury management strategy was agreed at the beginning of the year have been completely turned on their head. So just to give a very brief summary, we had been anticipating that there would be a gradual increase in interest rates throughout this financial year, moving us up to about 3.5%. What has happened, for reasons which I won't rehearse here, which I'm sure members of the committee will be very familiar with, is that interest rates have actually increased much more rapidly and to a significantly higher level than I think anybody had expected, and are currently around 5%. They have come off a bit in recent weeks following the reversal of the mini budget measures and the Chancellor's autumn statement. But as you will see from the table on page 7 of the report and page 77 in your agenda pack, we are expecting PWB rates to be around 5%, well, depending on the maturity, somewhere between 4.9 and 5.1% at Q3, and then to start to come off slightly after that. And by Q2 of next year, we expect them to have come down to between 4.2 and 4.5%, but still significantly higher than our planning assumptions at the beginning of the year. We are still in a position where we're carrying significant cash balances, and therefore we are still in an under borrowing position. So we're using our cash instead of taking out external debt, is what that means. As our cash balances reduce, there will be a need for us to take out some new external borrowing by the end of the year. But we have recently completed a review of the capital programme, and it is clear that the actual expenditure in this financial year will be significantly lower than we had originally expected. So the amount of debt that we have to to take on is relatively modest in the overall scheme of things, but it will be at a significantly higher rate than what we're currently earning on our cash investments. So overall, I think the under borrowing strategy, we will continue with that as long as we can. Where we do have to replace debt, either because we have more maturing loans or because we're running down those cash balances, we will look to undertake borrowing on a fairly short-term basis, because the expectation is that beyond 23/4, interest rates will continue to come down. So we don't want to lock into high rates unnecessarily. On the other side of the equation, in terms of the investments, the amount that we can earn from lending our cash to other local authorities on a short-term basis has also increased significantly. So in terms of the impact on the council's revenue budget, we're earning, I think we're expecting to earn about £2 million this year, which is significantly above the budget, and our debt costs will also be lower than expected. So all of this in the short term will have a beneficial impact on the council's budget, but the concern is about the longer term impact of those higher interest rates. As I say, the strategy is, I think, to not lock into longer term debt at high rates if that can be avoided, in the hope that we can do some further restructuring when rates have come down to a more manageable level. So the only other thing I would say, Chair, by way of introduction, is that all of the Treasury management activity in the first half of the year has been within the approved limits, and my expectation is that that will continue to be the case in the second half of the year as well. Thank you, Chair. Very happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that, Jan. That's very clear. A complex area, but made very clear in this report, and very obviously negotiating those volatile interest rates by using up the cash reserve seems to be a very prudent thing to do when the future is uncertain. Certainly from the point of view I can see. Anyway, I'll open up to the floor. Anybody have any particular questions for Jan on this report? No. A general shaking of heads. So again, as I say, thanks very much for that, Jan. It's a very complex area, but very lucidly presented. So thank you for that. We can move on then, in that case, if there are no questions for Jan on that. We move on to Jan again, because this one is Corporate Fraud Team Counter Fraud Annual Report. Report from Jan was actually, I was asked to present the report to the County Council. We are recommended that members present the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review Report to the County Council. So are we agreed with that? Agreed, thank you. Okay. Okay, so we have the report from, it says from Jan, but it's going to be presented by Gareth. Gareth is here to present the report, so I'll pass on to Gareth.
But yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report for the corporate fraud team from April 21 to March 22. Before getting into the details of the report, I think it's just worth mentioning that in January 22, the team faced a significant challenge with the loss of Barry Haig, and it's testament to the team that he built. The team was able to rally round and come together to deliver on the high standards that the team sets for itself. I'll just run through a couple of highlights within the report and then take any questions towards the end. So the main area of work that we've looked at in the last, in the period set out within the report is revenues, which looks at business rates, council tax, both single person discount reductions and council tax reduction claims and applications that come in to us. And then there's also the tenancy side of it, which creates a lot of the work that we look at.
was a fire alarm.
12 o'clock on Wednesday.
12 o'clock on Wednesday. That was mercifully brief, which means we're not vacating. It's just a test. So thank you. Sorry.
That's keep me on my toes. So yeah.
Thank you for staying in the room. We didn't just take the opportunity to leave. Thank you.
No, so yeah, I was just about to go into a bit more depth on the tenancy work that we carry out. A lot of that is the right to buy anti-money laundering checks that we carry out on all council properties. We carry out comprehensive verification checks into the source and legitimacy of funding that's proposed to be used. We also carry out tenancy checks and identification checks on tenants. We also work with housing, looking at cases they may have to recover properties where properties may have been abandoned. And there's also the illegal eviction aspect of that, which I'll come on to a little bit later. The other area of work that I just wanted to mention was the COVID grants, because during the 21-22 period, where a lot of other departments picked up work where that was presented because of the pandemic period, where there was the COVID isolation payments where they were passed to us, where there was a discrepancy over the satisfying criteria for that, as if there was a reduction in income. So we successfully invoiced for 55 of those where the criteria wasn't met, which was a good success. Later on in the report, it talks about sanctions and prosecutions and how the COVID pandemic impacted that in the ways that we carry out our work. But we did have the one prosecution that's for an illegal eviction, which I think it's really important to highlight the importance of that work we do. And that illegal eviction is a problem. It can be the vulnerable members of the society who could be more susceptible to unscrupulous landlords. So it's important work that we do to make sure that when illegal evictions do happen, there's that mechanism here for us to investigate and to take those forward. So that's a really good success story for the department, and again, especially for the more potentially vulnerable residents who may fall victim to any unscrupulous landlords. There's the back end of the report talks about the proactive counter-fraud work we do, but I don't intend to go into too much more detail on that. It was just to mention a couple of highlights within the form, but within the report, but I'll happily open up to any questions anyone might have.
Okay, thank you for that. That's excellent. I'll open it up to the floor if anybody has any specific questions on this report. Councillor Sesford.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just having a look at the page 93. 17 referrals for suspicions from the insurance team. I'm trying to find what sort of things would they involve.
Yes.
I notice it says that you've saved £12,500 on that. I mean, how much does insurance actually cost us? So how much was actually paid out on these insurance claims if you've saved £12,500?
The nature generally tends to be is personal injury claims against the council. They'll be passed through to the corporate fraud department for us to carry out some investigations on our side to see what the case has been set forward. If we can shed any more light on whatever we can find. I can't really go into specifics without knowing any specific case, but it gets passed to us, it's generally personal injuries that we look at where there's a claim against the council, and we look to just try and build a bit of a bigger picture using our investigative expertise. If we can offer any information that may not have come to light that insurance might not know about. I don't have those figures to hand. I mean, we only see the cases that get referred to us, so that will be a matter for insurance. So unfortunately, I don't have that figure for you.
So when you say personal injuries, Gareth, what sort of personal injuries are we talking about? Is there a repeated pattern attached to these things?
I'm just thinking of referrals that I've had passed through to me, trips and falls, whereby
like stones and things like that.
Yeah. Things of that nature. Where there's a lot of them are trips and falls, uneven paving slabs, so to speak. But what with insurance claims, it asks for a lot of supporting information and data. So there can be all sorts. Time of day, it can come into it. It's hard to give a specific example because it's so varied at what we get past to look at. But generally, trips and falls, it forms a lot of what we get past to take a bit of a deeper dive into.
Right. Okay. That's right. Okay. Any more? questions on this one? Because I think it's a very clear report, and thank you for presenting it. So I think that we're not asked to approve necessarily anything on this, but just to receive the report and to look at the progress that's been undertaken by the corporate fraud team. And we have done that. So thank you all for the work that you're doing, because obviously it's much appreciated. So
Thank you very much.
thank you. And you can leave now if you
Yes,
wish.
thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
To go into private contract and second it, it's a formal resolution.
Yeah. Okay. So we have finished the public part of our meeting. We'll let various members who have no part in this to leave, but we have to have a proper resolution to have the private part of the meeting. So let us go through that quickly. Sorry, I'm going a little bit ahead of myself there. Item 12, no urgent business has been reported. And the date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 25th of January at the usual time of 10:15. So part 2 of our meeting, which is not for the public's attention, it is expected that matters included in this part of the agenda will be dealt in private, and reports referred to are enclosed for members and officers only. They're coloured pink on your information pack. The committee is invited to consider passing the following resolution, that under section 100A of 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public are excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following item on the agenda, as it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in part 1 of section 12A of the 1972 Act. I need a proposer and a seconder for this part of the meeting. So can we have a proposer, please? Councillor Towns, and seconded by Councillor Jackson. Thank you very much. Okay, so if that's the case, can we